Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and trickling in from the coffee break. My name is Rachel Steward, and today I'm going to talk to you about a novel plant and how it may be unmasking heritable variation in host plant preference in a native butterfly. Many species use evolved recognition systems to find available resources or to identify risks or to decide when to perform different life history events. And these evolved cue response systems have been shaped through time to link reliable, predictable information in the environment with adaptive outcomes. But rapid environmental change can cause these evolved recognition systems to no longer be adaptive. And so, as I said, this might cause individuals to miss time life history events. They may not recognize or they may be overly cautious in the presence of novel predators, or they may use poor resources even though historical good resources are still readily available. And I'm going to talk to you about a case of maladaptive resource use by a native North American butterfly, Pyrus macdonaldi, which lays its eggs on native mustards, but it also lays its eggs on this invasive Eurasian species of mustard, Steward. And this maladaptive interaction has persisted since the introduction of this mustard, at least 150 years ago in the Colorado Rockies. Pyrus macdonaldi, as many pyrenees are glucosinolate specialists. So a glucosinolate is a defensive chemical that varies at this R group right here. So the glucosinolates that are making your arugula salad a little spicy are not the same glucosinolates that are making your kids hate their broccoli. These Pyrus butterflies can detoxify the glucosinolate defensive chemistry, and they also stimulate oviposition by the butterflies, but the degree of sensitivity to the stimulants and the ability to detoxify the glucosinolates is highly dependent on this structural modification. So that means that different mustards that vary in their glucosinolate profile are differently attractive and also differently toxic to Pyrus butterflies. And this has been the foundation of sort of a pervasive assumption or hypothesis that these maladaptive interactions with invasive mustards are largely based off of the glucosinolate profiles, and that they're really driven by plant chemistry. So if we were to visualize these maladaptive or potentially adaptive interactions with resources and the preference that an individual should have for a resource, we expect that resources of high value should be associated with high preference, and the reverse. Our maladaptive cue response system falls up here with high preference or above average preference for low value resources. And this imposes some selection pressure on the population. And in the case of Pyrus butterflies, we quantify that the degree of selection that they're under is related to the abundance and proximity of the native host plants to Steward. So there is an existing selection pressure. So how might they escape from this maladaptive interaction? One possibility is that they could improve their performance while maintaining a constant preference for that resource. Unfortunately for Pyrus butterflies, that is not really an option. All of the larvae die within the first or second developmental stages while feeding on this plant, and there's no variation in survival in any of the populations that we've looked at. So there's no heritable genetic variation in the ability to survive on this plant. An alternative escape trajectory is decreased preference, so they're no longer even recognizing a low-value resource. And while we do see a large range of preference variation within populations, ranging from no preference for the invasive plant to very high preference for the invasive plant, We are still unsure whether this genetic variation is heritable and whether a lack of genetic variation may be contributing to the constraint on the evolution of decreased preference in this population. So that's the hypothesis that I set forth to test, and this included two questions. Is preference for Laspia heritable? And one of the interesting things in the Lepidopteran literature is that there's a hypothesis surrounding the heritability, or that the basis of preference differences within populations, between distant populations, and between species. And this overall pattern from the literature has shown considerable autosomal heritable genetic variation within populations, but that the strongest signatures tend to be Z-linked when looking between populations. So this allows us to hypothesize, perhaps, that we should see, looking within a population, autosomal genetic variation. And then also going back to this idea that this maladaptive interaction is really driven by host plant chemistry, we expect that the heritable preference is also driven by host plant chemistry, and then we should see a strengthened signature of heritability. We tested heritability using a 3-generation pedigree, and I just want to point out at this moment that butterflies, females are heterogametic, so our 3-generation link of interest is these granddaughters and their paternal grandmother, although we'll also be looking at the daughter and mother pairs throughout the pedigree as well. We collected the parental generation from the wild, and we reared a second F1 and a third F2 generation in the lab. Here we can see some first instar larvae that just started feeding, a prepupa, a pupa, some mating butterflies. We used a preference assay called simultaneous choice assay, but this is important because it's a measure of preference when oviposition substrates are equally accessible. And in this case, we were comparing between Laspia benzi, the invasive host, and Cardamine cordifolia, which is not the most preferred host, but very highly preferred, and it is by far the most common and most available host to these butterflies. We also tested on a variety of different substrates, including whole plants, cut stems, and then to test this idea behind whether the glucosinolate chemistry was contributing to these heritable phenotypes, methanol extracts that included the glucosinolates from the plants. So our first question, is preference for Laspia benzi heritable? I'm going to start out by showing you just some basic regressions between the mothers and the daughters, and of course, if there is a relationship, we expect to see that falling out in the data here. Unfortunately, or well, no judgment value, but we found no relationship between mothers and daughters. But because we were also interested in the possibility of Z-linked heritability, we also tested between grandmothers and their granddaughters, and here we did see a relationship. We also then used dyadic mixed models, which can leverage the relatedness matrix of all the individuals in our pedigree to test whether there was greater Z-length or autosomal variance. And in this case, we'll see our Z variants, our autosomal genetic variants, and our environmental variants here, and then our variance components being mapped out here. So anything that crosses the 0 there can be considered to be non-significant. And here our estimates are once again coming out as Z-linked. One of the things to note, though, is that this model is particularly bad at portioning variance that is very close to 0, so that may be affecting our results. We also looked at the cut stems. Here, there is a little bit more environmental variance when we're using cut stems due to potentially induced defensive chemistry or other effects such as drying, but these were in flower picks. But we see the overall same trend that we saw before, although these lines are not significant. And when we look at the dyadic mix model, it once again sorts out Z-linked variance that is significant here, although that may be part of the model's variation there. So fitting this into this broad hypothesis of lepidopteran host plant preference, it may be that within populations when we have novel host plants, it's sort of recapitulating this situation where between species and between distant populations where suddenly you're exposing butterflies to host plants that they have not been evolving with for a very long time. Our second question, is heritable preference driven by host plant chemistry? We tested on these chemical extracts, which were created in a way that is commonly used to extract glucosinolates from host plant leaves, and then those extracts were applied to filter paper discs, just to show you the butterflies do in fact respond to these extracts, laying eggs here over the filter paper disc. And like I said, we expected the pattern to strengthen on extracts. However, it did not. And not only did it not strengthen, but the trends, which are non-significant here, are not at all related to what we saw before. And when we look at our dyadic mix model, it's pulling out autosomal variants that's associated with preference for extracts. So this is suggesting that our chemical, the extracts are not under or do not have the same genetic basis that response to the whole plants are. And one reason that that may be is that these chemical cues exist to different degrees in many of the host plants that are available to these plants or to these butterflies. And so these may be chemical cues that are resembling the within population variants that we originally expected. So here, just to summarize, we found that their preference for whole plants is heritable and sex-linked, but the preference variation is not driven by methanol-soluble plant chemistry. And one thing that I want to say is, you guys saw those scatter plots. There's a considerable amount of variation. These are behaving individuals that encounter a lot of different plants. So what we're also looking into is behavioral plasticity based off of their experience and how that might be also buffering these populations from any selection pressures from this invasive plant. So with that, I'd like to thank my co-authors and the many people who helped me in the field, and I'll take